So your question this morning is going to be question number 1. From their founding era until today, Americans have believed that the highest purpose of government is the protection of the rights of the people to whom it is accountable. Commitment to ideals about rights to liberty and equality is the foundation of an American national identity. What are bills of rights and how have they evolved? What positive and negative rights are found in the Constitution and Bill of Rights? How have the 3 branches of government expanded the rights of Americans? You may begin when ready.
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 5. My name is Maggie.
My name is Leland. Zhang.
My name is Carlson.
And my name is Anirudh Rengarajan. And we want to thank the judges, the timekeeper, and the audience for being here today, as well as the introducer coach, Mr. Denmore.
Bills of Rights are sets of protections that represent the beliefs of a nation and uphold the fundamental ideas of liberty and equality for all constituents of a society. Our unit categorizes the development of these bills into 3 periods: the pre-constitutional, foundational, and modern eras. The pre-constitutional period began with Magna Carta, 1215, which protected barons from the unbridled power of the king. However, we do not see Magna Carta as a true Bill of Rights because it primarily protected barons as opposed to all Englishmen.
The foundational era was heavily influenced by the natural rights philosophy that all men have inherent rights that need to be protected from overbearing, tyrannical governments. The Virginia Declaration of Rights in 1776 guaranteed the freedom of press and religion for all of its citizens, demonstrating the American desire for limited government. The Federal Bill of Rights was later broadened to protect all individuals under the United States jurisdiction, further expanding the scope of fundamental protections.
In the modern era, from the 20th century onwards, Bills of Rights transitioned towards idealistic promotions of equality for all people, regardless of their background. In 1948, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights enumerated the rights to healthcare, education, and social security to protect underprivileged classes. The world began to view government as a provider of rights rather than an infringer of them.
In the 1958 book, 2 Concepts of Liberty, scholar Isaiah Berlin categorized positive and negative rights, stating that while negative rights prevent the government from taking certain actions, positive rights grant individuals certain entitlements from the government. The Constitution and Bill of Rights heavily rely on negative rights, using language such as Congress shall make no law to limit government actions. The First Amendment, for example, prevents the government from advancing religious institutions and restricting free exercise.
Compared to negative rights, there are far fewer positive rights in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The 6th and 7th Amendments are considered positive because they require the government to provide the means of the judicial system to the criminal and civil courts. The remaining due process protections are expressly negative, and as a result, the judicial branch has a greater ability to interpret the Constitution in a manner that allows for stricter protections to protect individual rights.
The 3 branches of government each have had an important role in upholding liberty and equality. The judicial branch utilizes the powers of judicial review and incorporation to protect individuals' unalienable rights. In NAACP v. Alabama 1958, the Supreme Court used substantive due process to find the fundamental right to association, which was not explicitly stated in the Constitution or Bill of Rights. The judiciary's interpretation powers allow for the expansion of the federal government's ability to protect individual rights.
The legislature, on the other hand, proactively outlines specific provisions of individual rights through legislation and proposed amendments. Congress has introduced important rights through the 13th, 15th, and 19th Amendments, which outlawed slavery and gave women and minorities suffrage. Congress played a key role in expanding suffrage for African Americans by codifying the Voting Rights Act in 1965. By serving as the direct representative body of the people, the legislature ensures that the people themselves have the ultimate say in government.
The executive utilizes its broad enforcement powers to implement constitutional rights into reality. The president expands individual rights by issuing executive orders, setting the legislative agenda, and directing bureaucracies. In 1969, President Richard Nixon signed Executive Order Number 11478, which prohibited discrimination in the federal workforce on the basis of race, color, religion, and other provisions. However, we acknowledge that all 3 branches of government not only can, but have limited rights for Americans. The intention of government is to protect the rights we hold dear, and as a result, must be checked in times when it fails to uphold its duty. Thank you.
I'm curious your thoughts on this. Do you have a right to healthcare? How does that fit into this question of negative rights in the government at the state level, at the federal level?
be monitoring and overseeing the right to healthcare?
Well, the right to health care is predominantly considered a positive right because the government must, as we see that the legislature is usually the one that provides this positive right of health care, as can be seen in the Affordable Care Act passed by the Obama administration, or state legislation that has allowed for health care and Social Security. And for that, that reason, states are more likely to give out positive rights to individuals in the federal government.
We have seen historically that healthcare has been seen as a positive right. In FDR's second Bill of Rights, some of the primary provisions were a lot of positive economic rights designed to empower the people, just education and more specifically healthcare. And I think that if we look at sort of FDR and how this progression, America's always seen healthcare as a positive right that the people should be entitled to, as opposed to the government should be restricted and not provided.
In fact, a for freedom speech actually really influenced the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 to incorporate in Article 11 of their charter to include the right to health care to all citizens of the nation. However, the right to health care is extremely idealistic and it's extremely hard to provide for citizens, especially with the current partisanship of this nation, because we tend to disagree on whether we should provide health care to all of our citizens universally or should we leave it to the states. And that's one of the problems now that we see, but it has become more idealistic and left to the states.
Part of what you talked about were the positive and negative rights that bills of rights and government generally provides. I'm interested in your opinion on whether the positive or the negative rights are more important and why.
I personally think that negative rights are more important because our nation has a history of fearing big government, and negative rights are the best way to prevent big governments from infringing on individual liberties. Negative rights can be stated very vaguely, but they can still be interpreted to great effect to prevent governments from overstepping their boundaries. And this can be seen in the Fourth Amendment's right to the right to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures. The government cannot arbitrarily go around the Fourth Amendment, and as a result, it's a better protection for individuals.
I agree with Leland. At the same time, positive rights generally are not so effective at deterring government action because of the idea that the government has to provide the means by which people gain rights. In Chapter 2 of the South African Constitution, it has its own sort of South African Bill of Rights, which have many positive rights, such as the right to education and healthcare. However, we have seen that because of the socioeconomic divide in South Africa, that generally it is very difficult for South Africa to uphold positive rights because they're not in economic stability to be able to uphold positive rights.
I disagree with Ani in part. I believe that positive rights are more important to countries than newer. In countries such as South Africa, they have come to view their government as the provider of rights and the provider of protections, whereas in America we see the government as an infringer of our rights. And so in South Africa, it's extremely important that they have positive rights to tell other people, especially the majority class of white people, to tell them that I have this right to freedom of speech. I have this right to be protected by the government. And I see that that is an extremely important thing in other countries, but America, because we've had so many constant violations of those rights, we've resulted to negative rights in our Constitution.
Building off of Maggie's point, this is something that we've seen all the way back to our nation's founding, when the British government, as many of the revolutionaries stated, were violating all of their rights. They didn't view the government as a provider of something, but rather a taker of rights. So that is why in America, most people would believe that negative rights are better. However, as Maggie stated, most newer countries tend to view positive rights as being better. Because after World War II, many of the nations throughout the world, especially after the formation of the United Nations, began to view governments as something that could provide rights and that could act as peacekeepers rather than just arbitrary dictators that violate people's rights at all times.
I believe you said after World War II, a lot of these constitutions that were developed and the positive rights. Do you think that during the United States, if we were to focus on these positive rights, it would create a better society here in the U.S., or do you think that what we have right now is working?
I don't think that if we were to implement a system of positive rights in the United States, that it would work very well simply because of the way that our government is structured and the way that our judicial system works. It's rely on these negative rights and being able to interpret them in the way that they are for generations. And if we were to suddenly add positive rights in our Constitution, I believe that the fundamental change would be so drastic that it wouldn't be able to work. As much as I would love to have positive rights like health care or education listed directly in our Constitution, because they're not as easily to be defined, it is much more difficult for a government such as ours to uphold.
Going off what Will said, I believe that based on how our government is structured, a lot of the sort of positive right aspects are built into state constitutions and legislation. In California, it is mandated that every child has the right to education. They are required to attend school. And at the same time, when it comes to legislation, with FDR's second Bill of Rights, he talked about how people have the right to Social Security. However, the legislature was able to accomplish this with the Social Security Act.
However, I think if we take it back to the Anti-Federalists and Brutus I, they feared the Federalists in Federalist 78 described an executive power that was so powerful that it would overcome all of the Americans and their individual rights. And if we were to extend positive rights, that would require the government to create new agencies such as Social Security or Medicaid and Medicare and overcompensate the federal government rather than protecting individual liberties. And so positive rights overexpand the government. And I believe that would be detrimental to our society because we've had a tradition of negative rights in our past.
And many of the rights that we Americans hold here today come from a continued dealing out of grievances by previous monarchical governments. And the Declaration of Independence cites these grievances as a reason for our independence. And negative rights prevent the government from taking away those individual liberties, while positive rights tend to give the government more power to carry out its duty. And Americans fear that because they fear a big government that could once again take away individual.
What limitations on rights are currently accepted in the United States, and should we accept those limitations?
Currently, there are numerous states that have passed religious freedom restoration acts, which allow certain groups to infringe on other groups such as homosexuals' rights to buy a cake or whatever. And I think that for that reason, the states have a greater ability to infringe on individual rights today because of their need for legislative ability.
I disagree with the premise of your question. I don't think that Americans generally accept the violation of their rights. In 2001, the Bush administration authorized the Patriot Act, which allowed for Section 213 to authorize roving wiretaps, which require no specific location for warrants. And if their authorization that impedes on the individual's right to have privacy, especially on their social media platforms and in their self-service. May I finish my thought? I don't believe that we accept them, and I think that we see that today when many protests go along with the authorization and continuance of the Patriot Act. I don't believe that we accept them at all.
So we are running close on time, but we do want to provide you some feedback. Overall, I really appreciate the passion that you exhibited. I can tell that this is something that you really enjoyed studying and preparing for and are very knowledgeable on, and it showed through this morning. So thank you. It was great. I believe we just had a really good conversation with you about these topics, other topics going forward. So maybe we have another question this afternoon in this competition, but just going forward as citizens of our country and members of the world, I think this is really an important topic to think about what government should and should not provide and how to go through that and fund it. In terms of your prepared remarks, I will say that I really like how you broke down history. I'm always a big fan of chronology, and sometimes with these prepared remarks, I have a tough time following the prepared remarks, and you did a really beautiful job with the three eras. So thank you. That was one of the best ways that I've seen it actually in this competition. So I really appreciated that. In terms of the Q&A, I'm very impressed with all of your examples. And the one area where I was going to critique you a little bit was about state constitutions and legislation. You got into that, which I think is fascinating. So the next thing I would ask would be, okay, so in certain states, you might have a right to education and health care, but then in another state in the United States, you don't have that right, and is that okay in the United States? And certainly don't answer that right now, but think about that. How does that get resolved in our country? and that's something for you to ponder. Maggie, one thing I'm really impressed with is how you corrected yourself late in the Q&A. You were about to say anti-federalist, reading and you said, oh, wait, no, excuse me, it's federalist. Some VA, and I like that though. That's actually very powerful because sometimes in the nervousness and trying to get the information out and sometimes that's not always easy. You did a great job. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we're running out of time. We're running close to time, and I want to get my colleague to share.
I'll keep it short. I thought you guys did an amazing job. I really liked the breadth of knowledge that you had, and I love that you took it international. I love bringing in the South African Constitution, things like that. I thought that was great. One thing that I would critique you on, and this is probably because I'm a lawyer, I would have loved to hear more case law. I know this question is a little tricky to get into case law, but I would have loved to hear more of that and how that was an example of either protecting or limiting rights. And then Maggie, I also have to say, I really appreciated that you said, I don't accept the premise of that question. I like that because that, that you have to be pretty brave to say that to somebody. So thank you for doing that. That was refreshing. And that's really what I've got because I think you covered most of what my comments were. So yeah, thank you. Unit 5. Great job.
Great job.